Jessica. Real quick, I just want to share my windows are open. There's probably going to be some outdoor car sounds. I'm going to transcribe it, but if there is any beeping in the background, that's why. I'm here today with an appropriately affectionate and cuddly Willow so that we can go over the new books we're adding to the Werewolf Den. Oh! As much as I'm intrigued by the premise of werewolves and shifters, a lot of these books don't make it into my best reads of the quarter wrap-up. I do want to just share all these different collections of werewolf-read books I found. The first book is going to be Caged Wolf. It's part of the Darkmore Penitentiary series, and I've read the 3 books that are out by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. The badass female werewolf was like a cage fighter, and I was like,
oh, there's definitely going to be some great fight scenes in this. There's going to be a character that doesn't take any BS from anyone else. She's going to run the show, and it's going to be so much fun. Just get me to the punching and the kicking and the taking charge part.
And with any prison escape series or heist series, there's always part of me that hopes that I'm going to get like a little of that Ocean's 11, plans within plans, machinations, cat and mouse sort of like outfoxing each other element. It's sitting at with an average rating of 4.52 stars. It has about 5,000 ratings and 434 reviews. This book is 668 pages, and I can tell you book 2 and 3 have similar length. As far as what categories they're pitching it in the Kindle Unlimited store, it's going to be vampire suspense, folklore, new adult, and college fantasy. Vampire suspense makes sense. One of the supporting cast members is a vampire. Folklore, I think, is a great call because they do a lot of traditional myth around shifters, fae, different mythical creatures. They have a fake fae language that feels like it's a play on the Italian language, and in particular, it seems like this series is playing up couple of mafia stereotypes. This series does have a lot of violence, abuse, trauma. It's a prison story, and they have a co-ed prison with all the potential assault and abuses that you could imagine. This series also has a bunch of spelling and grammar issues in it. If that kind of thing turns you off, this is not going to be the series for you. I found that I was engaged enough with the character, her not going to give up, not going to be pushed around, not taking no for an answer, that I was able to overlook spelling and grammar issues. This is also a reverse harem story, and 2 of our love interests are abusive to our character. I don't know if you can redeem characters that are abusive to a woman and justify them as a love interest after the fact. If you can, it's not done in this particular series in a way that I found compelling. One of the love interests in particular is in a position of power over our female lead because he's a guard and he's been abusing his power for a long time. And she ends up getting the upper hand against him at a certain point in time and cursing him. So now he's sentenced to death. And there is like this love, hate, more hate than love attraction between the 2 of them that I just don't understand. I don't know why she likes the guy. The other abusive partner in this reverse harem does more to try and redeem himself and has more of like a personal background with her and her mobster family, which I'm not saying makes it right, but it gives some context to what's going on between the 2 of them, and it gives him a chance to sort of redeem himself or come at the situation in a new light. These books are so long. It's a prison break series, and we spend over 1,000 pages stuck in the prison break. They just keep finding reasons to like extend the stay. You should be able to break 2 weeks of time down into less than 1,000 pages. If so many things are happening in those 2 weeks, you just spread events out across time a little bit more. It just, to me, is a symptom of like a very immature sort of younger writing style where like you just keep spitfiring, machine gunning ideas, issues, and escalation at me. It works okay in a thriller that's like a tight 2-hour movie or like a tight 180-page book. But when you take thriller pacing and you put it in something that is closer to 2,000 than 1,000 pages long, it's just way too much. It begins to take the reader out of the experience because they're like,
how many heavy, hard-hitting things are going to happen back to back in the span of 2 weeks?
Nobody experiences this in their day-to-day life. But I really did have fun with the character. I was really interested in some of the pack dynamics that they showed with this Cage Wolf book. Our main character is from like a fae mafia family, and she's kind of like a co-leader in that pack. So when she comes into the prison system, there's a bunch of her pack spending time in prison. They've got like their own prison pack going on. She takes on the alpha and becomes the new pack leader. How the pack interacted with her, like how they helped or supported her, how they like emotionally engaged with each other, whether or not you were a shifter or another kind of fae, you could be part of this pack. It was all really interesting and engaging to me. I just thought that this book in specific did really well with the pack dynamic, and I've seen a lot of werewolf books that have been sort of falling flat in that area, so I appreciated specifically that. There is way too much outside noise. Give me 1 second while I fix this. One of the love interests is actually a childhood crush that our girl recently got in prison during a heist that went a little bit wrong several years back. Even though she took a job to save this specific prisoner, the real reason she's here is this is an opportunity for her to go after that love interest. And I found that to be like really sweet. One of the things I enjoy about this series in general is the way that they tell backstories. They don't give it to you all at once. They give it to you in little flashes and pieces when it's relevant. And it keeps a level of mystery about the characters going for longer, and it engages the reader. And when they give you that little insight or tidbit, it's at a point in time when you really needed it. Also, like the structure of the prison, and there's some kind of secret nefarious thing going on at this prison in general, and that mystery is really interesting. It's more interesting in some ways than the actual main plot, which is the attempt to escape. You start to wonder, like, who knows about this secret thing going on in the prison, and what does this mean? What are the larger goals? What are our characters going to do about it when and if they finally escape this prison? There's a 4th book coming out in this Darkmore Penitentiary. I don't know when. It doesn't have a scheduled date yet, but I'm really excited to read it, and it's definitely a series that I'm going to keep tabs on. Even though it's a little rough around the edges, there's a lot of stuff going on in it that shows really good world building and a good understanding of how to give a detailed, meaningful backstory to characters that's interesting and rich, but without just like front loading it on your audience. Next series is more of a shifter series than the werewolf series. It's Caged by Helene Gadot. The series is called Arcane Prison. Apparently this turned out to be a little prison corner, unbeknownst to me. The plot of this story is really interesting. Apparently humans felt threatened by magical beings, so they found a way to collar them and have basically imprisoned them in camps. It's pretty dark. This particular shifter that we're following is some kind of songbird shifter, and she was born in one of these camps and has never known freedom. I liked the first book a lot. It was dealing with some heavy topics, and it had characters navigating complicated situations. I don't want to get too far into it or give too much away, but the second and the third book didn't follow through. Are in the prison, their goal is to escape the prison. Unlike Darkmore Penitentiary, this book gets you out of the prison in book 1, but then they need to deal with trauma or the difficulty of spending your whole life in prison and suddenly being free. Like, this character should have no frame of reference for how society as a whole works. They don't know how to be an undercover magical creature in a world that's hunting her. She doesn't really know how to control her magical creature side or even explore that at all. So there's just like a lot of directions this book could have taken us in, but that's not how it goes. We kind of overlook a lot of those elements for a romantic sort of story and for like a revolution fighter style story, which honestly I don't think this character is well suited for, and her companions aren't well suited for either. And they just sort of brush a lot of their trauma or hard situations away. They talk about how they're going to take time to heal, or they're going to take time coming to terms with what happened to them, but they never really discuss it. We never really see any fallout or flashbacks or like nervous situations that arise. And everyone in this story has a chip on their shoulder for some kind of reason. They don't, number one, show you, they tell you that there's a chip on their shoulder, but then they never really face the situation head on or address it or deal with it in any way that gives like resolution. This is another book that's also riddled with spelling and grammar issues. You can tell this particular author self-published this and didn't have anyone edit it. One of the main love interests of this story, at some point in time, their name switched for chapters at a time. And I get it. As a writer, I have had like a working name on a character and then come back and giving that character their real or official name later. And it looks to me like they just never changed over this working character's name. And it's a shame because there's a simple find and replace feature you could use in Microsoft Word. You really don't even need an editor to double check that for you. And it just feels like they either didn't know about that feature in Microsoft Word or they wrote this in another kind of word processor. Either way, it's a little bit of a mess, and it's almost like a fun study of all the different editing and formatting things in ways that can make a book go sideways on you. The other thing about this Arcane Prison series is she's got a great cover on Caged. Such a great cover on Caged that she uses it for the other 2 books in her series with no changes or edit. And I'm not necessarily trying to shade the author, like certainly when you write for pleasure, or even if you are writing like as a hobby or you're going to turn that into a business. At first, it's not profitable, so you can't afford to have like a copy editor, developmental editor, formatting editor, and a cover artist. You have to sort of pick and choose. And I think she very smartly decided to pick someone to do her cover for her. First book's cover is really compelling. It's got this girl in this beautiful red dress. She's stepping out of like human-sized bird cage, and it's like one of those more ornately designed ones. So it's got like this visual flair in it, really draws the eye and makes you ask questions about the book. Part of what got me to pick it up was this cover. So she needed to put her money there, even if she also needed money for a copy editor, developmental editor, and probably a formatting. If she couldn't do all those things, I guess goal number 1 is to get me or whoever to pick up the book. So you've got to start with that cover. And despite all those errors that I just sort of talked about in the book and how unsatisfying I found book 2 and 3, there was a lot of promise and interest in book number 1, Cage. And I would read something by Helene Gadot again. This is a lesser known work. It's sitting at 3.9 stars on Goodreads. It has 288 readings and 33 reviews. Reading this book, rating and reviewing it would make a big impact to this author. And it's not a very long book, which I think is part of what drew me to it to start. It's only about 236 pages, so it's not a big investment in your time. I would check out book 1. I wouldn't bother with book 2 or 3. It's not developed enough, but book 1 leaves you at a satisfying place. Some people complained that it was a cliffhanger, but I felt like I had gotten enough emotional and storytelling resolution to sort of be satisfied with where they left it off. I guess it depends on what you're looking for in this story. Like if you're here for the reverse harem romance, then book 1 is a cliff. But if you're here because you're invested in the main character and you want to see her happy and free, then where they left off in book 1 is potentially satisfying. She's categorized it in dark horror fantasy, dark fantasy, and epic fantasy on Amazon. And I think all of those actually fit. She's done a pretty good job categorizing it. And I'm really happy she didn't pigeonhole it into some kind of dark romance or paranormal romance, even though she could have qualified it there, and I think she might have got a larger viewing audience, particularly with the reverse harem that's in play. Next is going to be His Never Mate, a rejected mate shifter romance by Spade, and it's part of a Claws Bang series. This book is also a little bit lesser known. It's sitting at a 3.44 star rating with 34 ratings and 3 reviews, and I think it's actually rated a little bit low for its overall quality and content. One of the things that hooked me about this story right away is that we jumped immediately into action. It's told in first-person perspective, and we've got this fated mate lady who is approaching her destined mate, the Alpha, and confronting him over rumors of infidelity and whether or not he's ever going to make the relationship official. And he tells her nah, he has no intention to do that anytime soon, and he doesn't deny allegations that he's been cheating on her. And she punches him and gets in a car and leaves. And I just loved it. I loved that this is where we were in the story. I didn't have to listen to all the drama leading up to this. I didn't have to listen to the ooey gooey feelings of it. She really cared about him. She was excited about being his mate. He didn't treat her right, and she said, "Forget you," and left. Such a fun start. And the fact that she just gets in a car and drives away and is out of this guy's reach, also a lot of fun. I love that it was so easy for her to get away from him, and it really shows how arrogant this man was in what he thought she was capable of and how he thought he was able to control her. All of that, so good. Then we flash forward after she sort of gets herself settled in a vampire city where she is tentatively accepted by vampires because one of the vampires kind of wants to date her. He is respectful of the fact that they're only in a friendship phase right now. And her mate tracks her down and wants her to go back to his pack, which obviously she doesn't want to do. And she doesn't believe that he really wants that. And she wants to know what happened with like his fling. And I just think that's great that she doesn't roll over and she doesn't accept him back or like accept his apology or excuses. All of that to me, so good. And the story starts to unravel, and I don't want to spoil it, so I won't go any further than that. But I just thought it was really fun, like the way that she stood up for herself, she asserted herself, the circumstances that surround this and how it all unfolds. It is part of a larger series. What I wanted from this story, I got out of book 1, and I'm really not sure where they would go in book 2. Based off the summary, it sounds a little bit like they're retreading what already got good resolution in book 1, which is why I haven't bothered to pick it up. There is a potential for a larger overarching story in relation to this girl's family. All of that for me took a backseat to her relationship with this guy. And part of the reason it took a backseat is because there's very little time that she spends in the pack. So she's kind of like a free independent agent. We don't get a ton of werewolfiness. We do get a lot of true mate ooey gooiness in the middle. And I thought that was like a great place to put it too. We got to skip angst on her side. We just know that there's angst on his side, and we don't have to listen to it because it's all told from her perspective. And we also get to listen to her talking about how ridiculous he is about his angst and how his angst is his own making. And I was into that too, because sometimes these stories are overly indulgent and overly about like emotions, will they, won't they, I'm misunderstood, blah blah. And this one doesn't linger too long. This is another fairly quick read. It's 352 pages, so a little bit longer than Cage, but half the length of Darkmore Penitentiary. It's the kind of book you could read over an afternoon if you're skimming, or 2 afternoons if you're reading every single word. And it actually scores pretty high in Amazon charts. It's number 1 in werewolf and shifter thrillers, number 2 in vampire thrillers, and number 3 in vampire suspense. While the vampires are involved, and I think they're going to play a larger role in future books in the series, I don't think they figure that heavily in. They're like a device that explains why she isn't pining after her mate and why her mate can't find her after she leaves him, other than being like a physical wall between her and her mate. They don't come into play. Next, we're going to talk about the Sworn Saga by Kate Avery Ellison. I have workshopped it on books 1 through 3, which would be Red Rider, Silver Wolf, and Black Veil, which you can check out here. And I've talked briefly about some of the other books in this series, how I think number 4, Black Veil, is the best of them. Number 5 is kind of like a weird, confusing mashup. And then number 6, Crimson Heart, and number 7, Scarlet Daughter, were kind of like shoulder-shruggy, confused messes too, in my view. I have read other Kate Avery Ellison books and really enjoyed them, but I do really feel like this Sworn Saga series lost its way somewhere in development. If we look at book 1, it's sitting with 3.95 stars. It has 2,281 ratings and 181 reviews. They're not long books. They're about 228 pages in length, so I understand why people pick them up and flip through them. Besides having like a werewolf element and being like a post-apocalyptic world and having tree zombies, it's also like a Red Riding narrative. So there's like a mashup of a lot of fun and interesting concepts in there, which is part of why I was so excited by the series and why I was so happy to see certain elements going in a specific direction eventually, only for that to fade out and go some kind of weird, confusing way that I really don't understand. The story fell away from me, and I was like, why is this happening? I do think Kate Avery Ellison really leaned into like the teen young adult market here, and she was just sort of like throwing spaghetti at the walls with what are the teens into right now. And you can see this a little bit in each individual story too. The first one has our lead in the Silver Wolf going through the woods together and facing zombies. The next one is kind of like a Hunger Games-y training montage arena mashup. The third one is like an espionage undercover agent kind of thing going on. The fourth one is almost like a Robin Hood retelling. I don't know what you would consider the fifth one. The fifth one goes off the rails. I think it's like
we revealed all the secrets there are, and now we just have to play this out.
Same with book 5 and 6. But it was just weird because at first I was thinking like the
series is super focused on the protagonist and her childhood crush's love and their relationship.
But the books are really not about that. And if they are about it, it's in like a weird, confusing way. So then I was like,
maybe it's about found family.
But our lead really doesn't get any found family. She meets different people and gets to empathize with them at different parts of the book, but none of them really stick around. There's a moment where it seems like they're going to have a love triangle, and then we immediately wash that out. There's like a last book reveal about the will they, won't they elements of this girl's relationship with her crush. It was just stupid and like felt like it didn't have the right kind of build up. She has some kind of immunity to tree crawlers that we never explain or explore. It's worth reading because there are so many interesting elements. Each one of them on their own would make a great story. And I love reading books and like seeing all the different thought experiments that happened and all the places they could have gone. But if you're looking for like a satisfying reading experience or a good story, that's not something that's happening in this series. I wish I could recommend you the Sworn Saga books 1 to 4, but unfortunately 4 ends on a cliffhanger. So that wouldn't be a satisfying loop, even though that would be pretty much all the books that are worth reading. Next is going to be Escaping Monsters, the Grayhaven series by Rita Stradling. This series has a 3.99 rating. It has 1,822 ratings and 180 reviews on Goodreads. The first book is the better of the two books in the series I've read so far, but it's fun. It's like a cozy romance, slice of life kind of story. There are some significant trigger warnings in this story, even though what's happening in the present tense is like this girl who has escaped guy who wanted to be with her that she didn't want to be with, and she's slowly developing a relationship with these other guys who are really nice and respectful to her. There's a lot of flashes about that previous abusive situation, her trying to escape it, all kinds of bad stuff like that happen in flashback and sort of like explain her skittishness and explain some of her reactions to things. And I mean, the story needs that because I think it might be just a little too calm and even paced if she weren't escaping anything or trying to deal with something from her past. This story is also kind of fun, it's humorous, it's got a lighter tone. You're sort of like bobbing along, going downriver with it. And I appreciate stories that sort of just take you on a journey and guide you that way sometimes. It is categorized in Kindle as humorous fantasy, new age, new adult and college fantasy, and werewolf and shifter suspense. It fits all of these. Next is going to be Klutz, Phoenix Down from the But Did You Die? Series by Sedona Ashe. This is sitting at a 4.13 star rating on Goodreads with 4,531 ratings and 343 reviews. And this book is terrible. I didn't find any of the characters unique or interesting. They're pretty flat and one note. They're very forgettable. The female lead is supposed to be kind of like quirky and secretive and like endearing in an awkward way that you can't quite define. And I just found her really stereotypical and annoying and just not my cup of tea. Like way too naive, way too unpleasant in a lot of ways. And I didn't like any of the boy love interests. I didn't like the forced march they were doing through the jungle. The whole thing was not for me. It ended on a cliffhanger, and because I didn't care about any of these characters, I didn't go on to read the others. They tricked me. It's got a great summary on it. It has a beautiful cover, and all of that leads to disappointment when you actually read. So I don't recommend this at all. It was awful, but I wanted to bring it up because it was such like a great cover, such a sort of fun, quirky sounding adventure. And its reality was just such an unpleasant, slow, forced slog. Next is going to be Wolf Moon, The King Rose Renegades, Pack Number 1 by Finley Quinn. This book is also sitting at a 4.01 star rating with 67 ratings and 26 reviews. And I rated it 1 star. I thought it was really bad. This has a lot of grammar, spelling issues, a lot of awkward phrasing, a lot of really weird stilted dialogue, and the characterization in it is just off. I was excited when I first found it because it features a character of color, and I was hoping that we would get a little bit of her cultural background and tie that into the werewolves, or not tie it into the werewolves, just have like her cultural flavor in the fact that she's a werewolf be part of the story together, and just kind of enjoy that particular spin instead of like a more generic white person werewolf. And we did get a little like hints of culture here and there from this character. Can't completely say that we didn't get that. She's 20 years old and she's acting like she's 6. And her grandmother started out being like a supportive grandmother, like in a traditional role that you expect. Then she just randomly started flying off the handle and threatened violence and all kinds of stuff. And not in that stern, grandma's going to give you a spanking or grandma upholds the law kind of way that you sometimes see. Mentally, you can reorganize some things and be like,
oh, she's a fiery, strong woman.
That wasn't the way that grandma came off at all, although perhaps that's how she was intended to be. Instead, it sort of felt like grandma went in these incredibly life-threatening, almost mentally unhinged rants whenever we needed to force the protagonist down a specific route. So it seemed like grandma's character was designed that way to force the plot to continue, and there was no larger considerations about how she would come off. And the other thing about this series that really bothered me is like the protagonist has moved to this town, get a fresh start, be involved in this pack. She gets to the pack, and right away, her and the alpha don't get along, and the alpha claims that she is his mate when she doesn't think that's the case. She's not feeling any kind of whatever it is that is the mate connection in this world. They're real vague about it. That's part of the reason I'm being so dismissive. Usually these like fated mate, rejected mate books are pretty specific about what they're feeling, how they're feeling, and how certain they are that they know. I thought it was interesting at first that he was so sure she was his fated mate and she didn't feel anything. I was like,
oh, this is an interesting dynamic.
But they did not develop that. Like, at all. They just had this guy be a chauvinistic asshole, be really bossing and domineering. I was like,
all right, so you had something that was like interesting and compelling, and you just got rid of it for generic.
The specific dynamic of having one character insist that they're fated mates and the other character not be able to sense it at all is a really interesting story all by itself. And they could have workshopped that and explored it and done something fun with it. And they didn't need this like larger than life chosen one myth that I haven't even talked about, and I won't because it's absurd and I can poke so many holes in it. It just isn't even worth talking about. The only element about it that I think is worth mentioning is the only person who seems to know this myth is the alpha of the pack and grandma. And because grandma comes off as so unhinged, I think it would be really like a great twist potentially in this series if the granddaughter buys into grandma's myth. Do you think she's this special chosen one with all these powers and this mission and whatever? And we come to find out that actually grandma is mentally unwell and delusional, and this whole quest she's been on is just like part of that delusion, and she has to come to terms with the fact that she's been manipulated by an unwell relative. That would be something worth seeing. This book has too much going on for that to happen, and also I just can't imagine this transforming so dramatically from what seems to be like really rote into something a little bit unusual. And I shudder a little bit to think of how this particular author would handle that story, because it would take a really delicate hand, I think, to address all the theming and implications of that and then figure out where they go from here once that reveal happens. But as the book currently stands, it's just, like I said, it's too many different ideas jumbled around and then put in their most derivative, generic form. Can't recommend this. I don't know how it's standing so high. Next is going to be Wicked Rejection, a dark rejected mates romance from the Predators and Prey Book 1 series by Scarlet Snow. I found this story by looking up other things Scarlet Snow has done. She and G. Bailey wrote Alpha Hell together, which I talked about in the last Werewolf Den, and we'll talk about further later on in this list. But right now, let's talk about Wicked Rejection. I had kind of thought that Scarlet Snow was like the grounding good one in the G. Bailey Scarlet Snow writing team. I've read some of G. Bailey's other books, and they're grammatically very poorly written, and the characters are kind of up and down and all over the place, and some of the language and concepts in them are just so simple. It's hard to believe that it's even meant for young adults. The theming is young adult, but the language and writing is like for a middle grade audience. I like sort of decided earlier last year I was down with G. Bailey and I was going to go ahead and check out Scarlet Snow. Well, this Wicked Rejection let me know that Scarlet Snow is also very all over the place writing-wise. She has really simple sentence structure. She doesn't really develop her characters. She has these complex worlds that she boils down. The relationships in her stories come out of nowhere and feel abusive and wrong and weird grammar errors all over the place. On one side, I could see how these two authors got together because their writing styles are very similar, and I bet their audience pool, whoever that is also very similar. But on the other side, I'm really perplexed because they wrote Alpha Hell together, and while that's a little bit of a hot mess, it's like a fun hot mess with some unique ideas and some more complex concepts coming together and some sentence structure and mythology that actually feels like it was planned out and like it's going someplace. So like, how did they manage that based off of their track record of books? But yeah, this book in itself has a 3.95 star rating on Goodreads. It has 594 ratings and 50 reviews. It was a really short read. I got through it in like an hour and a half. And as I'm looking at page details, I'm seeing it's only 136 pages, so that sort of explains it. I had to spend a lot of time rereading parts of this book because like I was genuinely confused. The sentence structure is really simple, but the grammatical errors build. So you're like,
wait, what is happening here?
It's not just like mixed commas and stuff. It's like misused words and like the orders of things happening are confusing. So I'd have to like reread it with new context. It actually trends really well as number 17 in mythology, number 84 in mythology on the Kindle store, and 153 in werewolves and shifter suspense. The cover is stunning, and I think Scarlet Snow is a great name. And they do really well picking like a great font and everything to go with this beautiful cover, very werewolfy. It's just such a shame that what's inside the book is so disappointing. Next book is going to be Feral Sins, the Phoenix Pack Book 1 by Suzanne Wright, 48,425 rating and 3,783 reviews. This book came to my attention through BookTube somewhere in late summer, early fall, and I put it on my list because it's about a girl who's a latent werewolf, which means that she was born in a werewolf pack, but for whatever reason she can't shift into a wolf, and her starting a fake relationship with an alpha of another pack, which she does to escape an arranged marriage that she doesn't like. And it was just like an interesting idea that they've sort of created their own secret arranged marriage, trying to make that work. They're trying to like outsmart her father and some other politics with other werewolves, and like her own internal politics, being a werewolf that can't transform into a wolf. Like I just like a whole lot of the political elements and the interpersonal things going on here. This is another book that has some great pack structure and pack elements. I do feel like the ending is disappointing on several levels, but overall, as far as like a relationship pack werewolf story, the pack house is pretty fun, the pack dynamics are interesting, the relationship she makes with other characters is good. I think the actual love relationship between her and the Alpha Terran and how that develops is like, I won't say it's super good or steamy because I don't really remember it that well, which means it couldn't have been that good, but it must have been passable because it also doesn't stand out as specifically offensive. Yeah, but if you're looking for the next thing that might blow up on TikTok, since usually BookTube covers things a little ahead of TikTok, and then we come back to it after TikTok has made it viral to get like that second hit of revenue or that second hit of attention, depending on where you are in your BookTube journey. But if you want to get into that loop while it's happening, I would go ahead and check this out now. It's on Kindle Unlimited. All these books are on Kindle Unlimited. Feral Sins was a really quick read, but it was probably like mid-level length. It's about 428 pages. There's quite a few other books in the series ready to go if you want to read more like this. I found the one good, but it trends at number 53 in science fiction romance, number 109 in werewolf and shifter romance, and number 114 in paranormal werewolves and shifter romance. Again, where I think this book excels is going to be in those relationships and those inner pack dynamics. The overarching plot didn't interest me as much, and because of that, that's really why I didn't go further with this series, is where they were taking me on a larger story I just wasn't interested in. Next is going to be Nothing But the Wolf in Me, a Black Valley Wolves book number 1 by Nikki Clark. This story interested me because number 1, it was like a black werewolf story, and it was another story where it was like human with a werewolf relationship, and that kind of dynamic was sort of interesting. And also I was sort of specifically interested in Nikki Clark because she does a lot of paranormal romance. This was like her first specifically werewolf story, but I wanted to get like a little taste of her in a genre that I was really familiar with the tropes on before I jumped into some of her other work. I was not personally a fan of this Nothing But the Wolf in Me story, but my reasons for not liking it are sort of specific to it failing as a werewolf story in my eye. So I'd actually be interested to see what Nikki Clark's takes are on some other paranormal story. But overall, this particular book is pretty popular. It's sitting at a 4.52 rating on Goodreads. It has 239 ratings and 54 reviews. So this could be like a really good hidden gem for someone who's looking for something just a little bit off path in Kindle Unlimited. My issue with the story, number one, was that the grammar was not great and it was poor enough that it started to detract from the overall quality of story for me. But also I found the story a little bit disjointed. The way some of the werewolf tropes were used was like a little heavy-handed, and then they missed some obvious nature animal tendencies that they could have gone into and didn't. And I think some of that has to do with this just being the first werewolf story that Nikki Clark wrote. It is part of a series. I haven't read book 2. I'm actually considering it because it is about the lead sister, and I found the lead sister to be a little bit more interesting than the lead herself. And last, I'm going to give you an update on Alpha Hell, the Rejected Mate series by G. Bailey and Scarlet Snow. I got all the way to Demon in Hell, a dark Rejected Mates romance, which is book 3. And I mean, I mentioned that book 2 had got weird. Well, book 3 just completely turned me off, and I'm not interested in reading any further in the story. In book 1, there were a lot of different elements that it was pulling and incorporating together, and it kind of like wrapped into an interesting story. Book 2 went in this unexpected direction that I wasn't really feeling, and book 3 leans into that unexpected direction and then takes an additional left turn that I don't like. So it's just not to my taste. It's too bad. This cover is beautiful. They have a great cover artist, whoever they are. I don't understand the title, a Rejected Mate series. It's not really about that. I don't understand what's happening with the reverse harem and the true mates thing going on. I don't understand all the different kingdoms. Like, why is the story going this way? I don't like it. This isn't what I wanted to happen. Upon reflecting on it, I can kind of see why they decided to take the story in this direction, where it's going to go, and what the conclusion will be. So it's not like there won't be a beginning, middle, and end. It's just like not what I wanted at all. And I'm not at all interested. I'd probably recommend this to like a young adult audience if they're looking for something that was different and like incorporating a lot of different elements of fantasy together in one story. But if you're like an adult reader, this is probably not for you. It doesn't hold any of those like werewolf tropes that I enjoy. Like, we're not getting like a lot of pack relationship situation that I usually like. We're not getting a lot of like that human animal distinction. We're not spending a lot of time in her werewolf form. Just the things that I think can be really charming about werewolf shifter fiction are not happening. Or like things that can be really scary, also not happening. And that's going to be all from the werewolf den. As you can see, I have gone through quite a few werewolf series since October. If you know of another Kindle Unlimited werewolf book for me, please go ahead and leave it in a comment down below. And if you're looking for more Kindle Unlimited werewolf reads for yourself, I've got a playlist of all that here. Thank you guys for watching. And as always, keep reading. Bye!